I want to quote Megan Smith. Where are you, Megan? She's not here. I told her I was going to quote her. We're just in the green room, former chief technology officer at the White House, former Google. There she is. She's right there. Wave. I told you I'd quote you because this is this is key to what Ann is doing now. She said, "Women are very intersectional." Now think about that for a minute in terms of breaking down silos, and that's where we're going to go with this conversation. But we're going to start with your personal journey, which is very powerful and sad. You were diagnosed with MS.
Right.
Tell us about that.
I was nearly 50 years old, and I was very active, loved sports, loved doing things, and mother of 5 boys. And
active campaigner, I might add.
I was diagnosed at an age that I thought I was beyond being able to be diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And it was a devastating thing in our lives, my husband and myself. And I started a new journey of self-discovery. And it was something that is more difficult than people might imagine, because if you're independent and strong and healthy and then all of a sudden you're not, something happens to your identity. And you try to figure out, again, who am I? What worth do I have? And you go through quite a crisis, and actually I ended up going through depression as well, because you do lose your center. And I was fortunate to have a very, very loving husband that pulled me through and made me fight. And I think the next chapter is much more fun to talk about.
But just to finish that, you've really kept symptoms at bay. Horseback riding's been a big piece of this. Talk about
the therapy. So the therapy initially was massive dose of intravenous steroids, which are horrible. And as they're being pumped into your body, you're like, oh, my bones are disintegrating as I sit here. But it's the only thing that really stopped the progression of the disease for me. And then after all of that was done and the progression stopped, it's one-sided, MS is, so my numbness and weakness and muscle loss was all on my right side. And I was getting very close to being in a wheelchair, having difficulty walking, falling over. I mean, I was really, really in bad shape. And then after the drugs sort of stopped the progression, I still felt terrible. I was enormously fatigued. I just had no energy. And I mean energy to the point where it took effort to talk. And so that's when I realized at that point that Western medicine had no answer for me, that I had to figure out what to do. And I thought, what is it that I love so much in life that I'm afraid I'll never be able to do again? And it was horses. And so I started riding. And the riding really helped me enormously, made me forget I was sick, brought joy back into my life, just was as a wonderful thing. And
you won a major award in dressage this year, right?
I was last year the #1 United States champion, amateur champion for the United States last year. So
At age.
Way older than, I can say I am competing against people way younger than myself. I am 68 years old.
Isn't that amazing?
So horses have been my partner in healing, and they've been my partner in other ways as well, and I owe a great deal of gratitude to them. And I now, as you might imagine, am very involved as well in therapeutic horseback riding because it applies to people with PTSD, people with, you can't imagine, children with autism. You will get a child that does not speak, and they will put him on the back of a horse, and he's able to speak. And it's like, you see these miracles happening over and over again. You see children with spasticity that don't have the core strength to even sit up, and they get on the back of a horse, and they instantly are able to have better posture and sit up and have different strengths. And so for me, it's not, you wonder why. Monty Roberts is a good friend of mine. He's a famous horse whisperer that works with the Queen and all of her horses. And Monty is in California, and he is working with vets with PTSD with horses. And I help him and help raise money for him. And I said, Monty, he's a cowboy, real cowboy. I said, Monty, can you explain this? Why do the horses help so much? And he looks at me like, who the hell cares? I don't know. It just works.
So let's move on to your current journey. I want everybody in this room to raise your hand if you know anybody with, and you help me here.
Do you want me to help? Okay, it's MAPS, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, brain.
Raise your hand.
Brain. Thank you.
Now you're going to be very interested in this because where we're going is going to affect all of this. Talk about your doctor deciding, based on research involving you, that MS breakthroughs would affect Alzheimer research.
So after the historic election where my husband lost in 2012, I was visiting with my MS doctor. I have a yearly checkup, and I still, on occasion, have a few symptoms, but I'm really in very, very, as you can see, very good place. I was asking him, I always do, I said, tell me what the newest research is, because he's one of the lead MS researchers in the world. And he said, well, you know, it's kind of curious, but my research has led to this breakthrough in Alzheimer's. And I said, what? And he said, and you know, he goes on and he says, you know something, we're kind of experimenting with a new Parkinson's drugs. And I think we're kind of trying to figure out ALS. And there's a drug, and I looked at him, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, wait a minute, I thought you were an MS researcher. And he says, well, my research has led me to all these other pathways and other developments that I think we can make breakthroughs in. And I looked at him and I said, darn it, Mitt lost, and we could have had huge impact, but let's see what we can do with a smaller impact with me helping. But why not have a broader approach, if not just saying we're going to do research for multiple sclerosis, but we're going to do research for all of these diseases you just mentioned.
See, women are intersectional. That's where we are.
And he went with that idea, presented it to the board of Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. A few months later, he comes to me and says, we want to do this, but we want to name it after you. And I'm like, well, that's all fine and good, but why don't you name it after someone that's going to give like $25 million to this thing? And that's not me. And he said, and he like, oh no, we want it to, over time, I finally relented and agreed to let it be named after me, and we now have something called the Ann Romney Center for Neurologic Disease, which studies multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's, and brain tumors.
And that doesn't exist anywhere.
No, it does not.
That's the first, it's breakthrough. I want to bring in the audience soon, so get your questions ready, but show us some of that intersection and how it works.
So we have a brand new building at the Brigham. We have many floors. We also have something called a 7T MRI machine. It's a 7 Tesla. Most MRI machines are 1.5, some are 3. There's a few in the country that are 7s. With that, we are going to make enormous breakthroughs because we're going to see into the brain and we're going to find that little monkey that's in there that no one's ever been able to see before. But nonetheless, we have 250 researchers that are trying to unlock some of the mysteries of the brain. And I will tell you what's happening at the Ann Romney Center that I'm very excited about. These researchers have developed a nasal vaccine for Alzheimer's. The very first human trials are starting right now. This has been coming for years, but they're starting right now. And the very first people that will be tested, there will be about 20 that we'll start with. They will all start at the Ann Romney Center.
And they have, I assume they have to be like...
You have to be pre-symptomatic.
Pre-symptomatic. So, and again, and this is, the other great thing about this center is the focusing on women's health, because Alzheimer's, go ahead.
Okay, I will get to that. So also, we are going to start for the very first time a trial for a treatment for ALS. As most of you might know, there is absolutely no treatment right now for ALS. When you have a diagnosis of ALS, it is the most devastating, horrible, horrible disease, and there's nothing anyone can do about it to slow it down or stop it or reverse it. So we have a drug that we know that is working in labs that we are going to be starting human trials with this year as well. So, Nina, what did you want me to talk about?
Women and Alzheimer's.
All right, so let me give you a statistic.
And women in MS.
Brain works. Every 66 seconds in this country, someone will be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. 2/3 of those people will be women. And no one needs to say how devastating Alzheimer's is. We all know. And it is a horrible, horrible diagnosis. I am partnering right now, again, to broaden it, with Maria Shriver. Maria's father died of Alzheimer's, and Maria is a fantastic woman that is just has so much energy, and she cares passionately about Alzheimer's. So Maria and I are partnering. And when she was interviewing me for a book, the book that I wrote, In This Together, it was for the Today Show, at the end of the interview, she told me the statistics about women with Alzheimer's. I did not know that. Even though we were talking about research and Alzheimer's, I was not aware of how much more prevalent it is for women. And then she said something else. She says, do you know nobody's doing anything about that? And I'm like, what?
And they don't even know why. They don't even know why.
They have no idea why women, and it's not as simple as hormones. It's not as simple as estrogen. So, as a lot of men might, disagree with us on that, that's a lot of answer to a lot of what they think is wrong with anything where they disagree with us. But she put that thought into my head, and I go back to my researchers, and I'm like, is anyone asking the question why? Well, it turns out really there is not much research being done on why women have such a much higher incidence. I will tell you that this year we are adding more researchers, and we're starting in my center to ask the question why. And so women need to get involved. They really do need to get involved. And we really tackled breast cancer really well. And the incidence of breast cancer is such a success story with so many women that are living now because of all of the work that's been done with breast cancer. We need to do the same thing with these neurologic diseases that are affecting women at a disproportionate number. By the way, multiple sclerosis is the same story.
It's like the same.
I will tell you, Parkinson's men have a higher incidence. So there is, in the brain, a sexual difference between incidence of disease.
Questions? Right back here. Please tell us who you are.
Marcia Moffat with BlackRock. And I've also got a particular interest in the brain. Much of my work outside of work has to do with the brain. I'm curious as to what are the markers that made the team determine that there was some kind of link between MS, ALS, Alzheimer's, that it would make sense to study these and research them all together?
I think the brain is such a mystery. But the reason it started to happen this way is there would be a drug given in experimental situation, and it was, for instance, it was an MS drug. And someone with Alzheimer's was given this, and it stopped their Alzheimer's in growing. And this is what it started happening with researchers, where they were giving a particular drug, and it would have an impact on another disease, and that they thought was going to be working for, like, let's say, multiple sclerosis, and it started working for Alzheimer's. Well, then this person then had MS. by doing that, that person had got MS. And there's like, so I think the researchers started recognizing that there were links between the diseases. And I will tell you, I mean, like with Alzheimer's, Dr. Dennis Selkoe, he's the co-chair of my center, was the person that discovered amyloid plaque. Amyloid plaque is the substance that lays over the top of the brain that happens sometimes 10 to 20 years before you have your first symptom of Alzheimer's. He was the one that made the connection that this is related to Alzheimer's. His research was discounted for 10, 15 years. No one believed it. After the amyloid plaque lays down, then something called tau develops inside the amyloid plaque that then goes into the brain and really destroys it. So the fact that we now know, and this is something you may not want to know, if you get a brain MRI and you see amyloid plaque and you're running around and you think you're fine, you're not going to be. I mean, it's really tragic because it is something that is a precursor. So things are happening in the brain that happen way before the first symptoms happen. And so, again, the research is so new and so exciting right now because we are able to uncover some of these mysteries. I cannot tell you why it is that these diseases are related. I will tell you that it's very difficult to treat anything neurologically because there's something called I'm not a doctor, by the way. There is something called a blood-brain barrier. And to get drugs past the blood-brain barrier, you have to have massive doses of it. And that is then dangerous to the rest of the body and then, dangerous to the brain as well. And then how we're delivering drugs now through the blood-brain barrier, which is being effective in some ways, is through a virus. The virus will pass through the blood-brain barrier. And for instance, we are able to treat glioblastoma, which is what John McCain has, what Senator Kennedy had. And that was untreatable before. But now we are really, truly experimenting with different things now where we can bypass and go through the blood-brain barrier. So I think the point is that we're on a threshold, and it's a brave new frontier, and it's the next chapter in medicine that is going to change in our lifetime.
And very, very quickly, what do you need?
Money. And let me tell you why. Let me tell you why. In the past, NIH has financed all research. What has changed? For instance, at my research center, we knew we were onto something with ALS and Alzheimer's. But we can't go to NIH and say, give me a grant, I think I'm onto something. NIH isn't going to give us any money until we have proven that that works. Well, how are we going to get the money to do this out-of-the-box experimentation? And it's philanthropic dollars.
Right.
Is the only way to start a new something with a new idea, because NIH, by the way, the NIH budget is shrinking along with everything else in our federal government.
And thank you.
Yes.
I talk about intersections that are truly, truly transformative. Thank you so much. It's fantastic.
Okay, good.